This video is sponsored by Doogie, more on them later. If there's one thing that you can be sure of whenever Nintendo decide to make a new Pikmin game, it'll be that they'll load it up with boss fights. It makes a lot of sense why Pikmin has such a strong affinity for boss fights, given that you're in charge of your quirky squad of plant aliens and have to clear out the local area of small enemies, and also absolutely massive and often very dangerous boss fights. It's the David vs. Goliath theme that Pikmin thrives on, fighting these giant monsters that are fully capable of eating your entire squad if you give them the chance. Pikmin 4 obviously kept this going and had a tasty combination of new boss fights and some exciting highlights from previous games, and so really the ball is in my court to rank all these suckers. An undertaking that would have been extra challenging this week since there's quite a number of them to talk about, but luckily this video is sponsored by Doogie and their fancy tablets. I've been in the market for a while for something smaller than a laptop that I can carry around and whip out whenever I have the time, and Doogie were kind enough to send me their T10S and T20S tablets that both come with 10-inch blue light certified screens for a crystal clear display, an ultra thin metallic design, and 256GB of internal storage. My main use for this has been for writing scripts when I'm away from my desktop, and it's been a lot easier to use than when I was just using my phone. They come in 3 different colours so you can find one that suits your style, and I've even got a pen so I can work on my art. If this all sounds good to you and you fancy pick one up today, you can go to doogiemall.com/products/doogie-T10S or T20S if you fancy that instead, and plug in the code TS30 to save an extra 30% off. That link is also in the description below if you don't want to type anything out. Thank you again to Doogie for sponsoring this video. Getting down to business, and the giant bread bug was one of the easiest fights in Pikmin 2, and sure enough, its return in Pikmin 4 changes basically nothing. You can't damage it with regular attacks, since apparently a loaf of bread is the strongest material in the world, but you can drag it all over the place with some Pikmin tug of war, and it takes damage from smacking its head on your spaceship. It's probably an icon of Pikmin at this stage, but not for its difficulty, and Pikmin 4 doesn't need any help with being easy. Pikmin has a loose classification over what does and doesn't count as a boss fight, but generally, I'm looking at any significant battle, usually at the end of a cave system, and it sometimes comes with different music. This criteria manages to squeeze in the puffy blowhog, who definitely functions more like a mini-boss, or just a decently strong enemy since Nintendo nerfed the shit out of it, and now it's the boss at the end of Drafty Gallery, and yet it'll die super fast. Probably annoying if your Pikmin gets blown off the edge, but when it telegraphs its attacks like this, that's on you if that happens. I think the Horned Cannon Beetle counts as a boss. They definitely were in older Pikmin games, but the method for defeating one doesn't quite match their presence and the danger that they can pose to your Pikmin if you really aren't paying any attention at all. Lob one Pikmin in its blowhole. Are we calling this a blowhole? And it'll expose its vulnerable back, and it's pretty straightforward from there. It looks like a weapon, and yet you defeat it like a pointless dolphin. Some of the boss fights in Pikmin 4 are just bigger versions of normal enemies, and when the mammoth snoot whacker turned up at the end of Dream Home, I couldn't help but think that I had more trouble fighting the smaller versions without Ochi to help me. 2 rush attacks will flip it onto its side and expose its bright red weak spot, and then it's just a matter of sending the boys in to do the business. I guess the mammoth snoot whacker has got its massive trunk, which can be a problem if you've fallen asleep, but for everyone who's still awake, no issue whatsoever. The Crusted Rump-Up has a concerning name, but sadly this doesn't translate into much of a concerning boss fight. The weight of 15 Pikmin on its tail is enough to send it to the floor and reveal the glowing orb it has as a weak spot, and all you've got to contend with by way of Krusty being a threat is this short-range charge attack that may catch the occasional Pikmin off guard, but generally isn't worth worrying about. Yes, I googled Rump-Up, what about it? Toxstall is only helped out because of how specific poison is as a hazard. The original Puffstall is a famously passive enemy that stumbles around like an idiot, and while the Toxstall doesn't do much else different, it now sprays out a ton of poison as its primary method of dealing damage, and that means you need to crack open your stock of white Pikmin in order to reliably kill it. The Toxstall can also revive the enemies in its surrounding area, which is just enough for it to be a slightly more interesting fight than what we've talked about so far. Anything that gives white Pikmin something to do. The Guildmander works out a bit like the mammoth snoot whacker in execution. You charge at it with Ochi, its weak spot becomes clear as day, and then you send in the cavalry to bring home the bacon. The difference is that it works a lot like its smaller counterpart, where you're knocking off the gold stones, and the Guildmander has about half a dozen that all cover some kind of weak point. It's a lot of slamming your dog into the side of this lizard over and over again until your Pikmin have popped all of these big red spots. Not particularly difficult. If there was any confusion over whether the horned cannon beetle is a boss, then there should be less confusion over its Arctic cousin. There's not a lot that's different here, but it's a little less brain dead since the area in which you fight the Arctic cannon beetle is very cold, so you need to bring ice Pikmin to destroy the ice blocks before you put your stronger Pikmin to task. Other than that, you defeat it in virtually the exact same way as the non-icy variant. Just make sure it's warm and toasty first. The Porkillion is considered a boss fight almost entirely because it functions as the tutorial boss when you're still in control of Olimar. The idea is to teach you to not rush in all guns blazing with every enemy in Pikmin 4, and accept that sometimes you need to wait a moment for the foe to do its thing and counterattack instead. By this brief, Porkillion does the job just fine. You have to wait for it to shoot out all of its spikes and then launch your Pikmin in with half an eye on how long it takes for Porkillion to reload its spikes. Simple but effective, and if you don't count it as a boss fight, it's one of the best designed standard enemies in the game. As a boss though, it's just okay. If I were only ranking boss designs, the Snowflake Fluttertail would likely rank a lot higher than 12. In a franchise obsessed with Bulborbs and spider-like Dweevils, an ice moth that elegantly floats through the air is a real shot in the arm for interesting boss design. The reason why it's 12 is that it isn't quite able to keep up this early promise in the actual boss fight. I like how it uses the fire starters to break its cocoon so that it's vulnerable to standard attacks, and how ice Pikmin are required to warm up the area so that your reds don't freeze to death. It's just not a very threatening boss to face, and even less so when you've broken the only defense it had. Avoid its ice breath and you're golden every time. My memory of the bug-eyed Crawmad in Pikmin 4 was forgetting about it when in Giant's Hearth and sending blue Pikmin to return treasure and wondering why they were dying. This guy was in Pikmin 3 and I remember it being more threatening, but I do appreciate how the boss requires you to take a bit of a risk to damage it. You attack its big bug eyes, which does put you a little too close to its mouth to feel too comfortable, but once he's had enough of that, he shows his soft underbelly and that's usually it. The only reason why I ignored it in Giant's Hearth for so long is because I forgot how to damage it. What price experience, eh? Foolix was a reference that I didn't expect to see. Pikmin 1 had Gulix, which would drown red and yellows, but blue Pikmin were invulnerable to it and were capable of bullying it a tad. Foolix is designed to look more like nectar than a blob of water, which means that blue Pikmin aren't invincible here, so you actually need to fight it the more intended way. It's not too difficult to work out what you need to do, although I would say that Foolix can retract its tail thing very quickly if you're not careful. You bust it out of its gooey bubble and beat the shit out of it, and thankfully, Foolix has enough health at this point in the game so that you don't one-cycle the poor thing. I don't need to feel like the villain, thank you. Empress Bulblax is the sort of fight that can easily go so wrong if you are completely unaware of what this boss is likely to do for an attack. It is obvious that she would roll from side to side, but to be fair, if you're caught out by this, you will suffer some pretty devastating loss of Pikmin life on a scale that few bosses in the franchise can match. It's less complicated than it looks though, since you can hurl Pikmin at her face and recall them before she gets too violent with her thrashing. The first time you fight her is very simple, but the second, where you can't reach her face and the only thing stopping you from getting crushed are these handy geysers? Yeah, I fucked this up a few times. Thank God for Rewind, am I right? Man at Legs in Pikmin 2 is absolutely ridiculous. I don't know who decided to give a spider a machine gun, but I want to say that it was a cool idea, but I don't know. It's kind of a shock to the system to go from fighting all this wildlife to this actual weapon. Pikmin 4 did Mao a little dirty, or maybe that's just because you can keep your Pikmin more tightly packed on Ochi's back, but I didn't think it was anywhere near as threatening in Pikmin 4. That being said, I was happy to see it, and I felt a warm rush of pride that a mechanical spider wasn't so surprising this time around. It needs to learn to lead its shots though. When I think about all the time we've spent with borrowing Snagrets, I do feel nostalgic for a time when they were a serious threat in Pikmin 1. They aren't so bad in the fourth game, especially since they can get stuck in the ground and leave themselves open for a breathtaking amount of damage, but they're a boss that is perfectly capable of causing you problems if you rush in recklessly. Yellow Pikmin are helpful if you don't fancy waiting for the Snagret to faceplant the dirt, but you're really playing a dangerous game by wafting your Pikmin in front of its face. There's more than one, things can spiral out of control very quickly. I would now like to address the mix of awe and nostalgic terror that shot its way down my spine when I saw that there was a cave called Engulfed Castle in this game. The double take was real, the slow realization was even more real, and hearing the theme from the submerged castle slowly becoming more prominent was equal parts horrifying and oddly enthralling because I knew what was coming next. The Water Wraith is an icon of Pikmin, one that many have real nostalgia and unresolved childhood trauma for, and Pikmin 4 sought to recapture some of that history. It does for the most part, but my only real complaint is how very little has changed with the Water Wraith. You're still relying on purple Pikmin to take him down, which can only happen on the last floor, and before that it's a game of cat and mouse if you take too long gathering up treasure. He's still a problem, but he's lost the element of surprise. He's really good, but I wish something was new. As soon as the first Pikmin introduced Bulborbs, an enemy classification that can pose a real threat to your squad of Pikmin, there was always likely to be a Bulborb hierarchy, and right at the top of the tree with the Empress, which we've already talked about, is the Emperor Bulblax. Not King, because Kings are fucking pussies. Emperors get their hands dirty and eat Pikmin like they're going out of fashion. On their own, they're not too ridiculous, but Pikmin 4 usually puts more than one next to each other, and that is a major problem just waiting to happen. Their roar can scatter your Pikmin and leave them vulnerable to the Bulblax's big lick, but it also wakes up the other Emperors, and that's not okay. He's a noisy fucker. If the Water Wraith returning was a shock, then I wish I had a camera on me when I realized that the foot of the stairs night level had a fucking smoky prog in it. What the fuck? Originally, this was an optional boss in Pikmin 1 that only turned up in the distant spring on or before the 15th day, and upon breaking the egg it would make a beeline for your landing site and generally wreak havoc on any Pikmin, insta-killing any that made contact with its purple gloom. It's much the same in Pikmin 4, except now old Smokey now spits out some gloom, so you've got mobile patches of insta-kill death to worry about. Honestly, Pikmin has come a long way since the first one, so Smoky Prog isn't too crazy with all the options you have at your disposal, but I'm still so glad to see it again. Believe me when I say it takes a lot to dislodge iconic bosses like we've already covered, but you better believe that Groovy Longlegs is more than capable of rising to the challenge. It was a large part of the marketing, and it's not too hard to see why, with a vibrant design and some awesome music that Mr. Longlegs stamps his feet to. It's capable of inflicting this dance status effect on Pikmin where they dance up and down and even sing to the background music. Very unique for a Pikmin boss, and just a ton of fun to fight in general, when he isn't overachieving like a motherfucker. As far as mistakes go, my personal experience of Pikmin 4's final boss was punctuated by just ignoring the chance to get yellow Pikmin, with the thought that maybe the ancient Sirehound is a little like previous final bosses, you know, the ones that require lots of different colours. Yeah, so I had to fight the electric part of the Sirehound without any yellows, which very nearly ruined everything for me with this boss, but I endured and I quickly started to love this fight. The Sirehound is agile and each stage tests your ability to adapt to new hazards and keep your more situational Pikmin safe. Is it a little strange that Louis has been the final boss of 2 Pikmin games now? My guy has an agenda. Emperor Bulblax turning up in Pikmin 2 was a major downgrade since he's neither much of a significant boss, nor is he the giant imposing presence that he was in the first game. Several enemies and bosses have been downgraded over the years, so you could chalk it up to a bit of that, and I was definitely under that impression around about the same time I was exploring the Giant's Hearth, and found an Emperor Bulblax that, how about this shit, is absolutely massive. That's because this is a Sovereign Bulblax, which may well be the new name for Pikmin 1's final boss, and these guys are much more like what I remember. They function like standard Emperors, but they're bigger, stronger, and taller, which means you need to do more Pikmin chucking than Ochi rushing, and you have to give them more respect because of their massive health pool. There's a significant lack of cheese strats with a Sovereign Bulblax, and it doesn't matter too much how much Pikmin 4 you've played, he can and often will humble you. And yeah, I think that's every boss fight in Pikmin 4. Do you agree, or is there something else you'd have at number 1? Let me know in a comment down below. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a like and hit subscribe for more, and hit that bell for notifications of every new video. If you need something else to watch right now, I ranked Pikmin types last week, and I also want to thank my top supporters on Patreon, including Sarah Mallion, The Green Scorpion, and Christopher Robinson. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.